Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Wandering Road podcast. I'm your host Chris, alongside my co-host Dean. I just realized this is going to be our episode that releases during the week of Christmas. Merry Christmas to all who celebrates, and happy holidays to everyone else. For today, we are going to revisit one of my older episodes, all the way back to episode 3. This was a solo episode that I did before I brought Dean on the show to ruin everything. And the topic of discussion today, we're going to revisit La Llorona.
Before we start, I have some interesting stories to get your perspective on. It's kind of silly. It might be a little bit ridiculous, but so recently I've been trying really hard to get my shit together more, like all of us tend to do at the end of the year. And one thing I've been incorporating most mornings is like a little meditation session. I wake up 5:36 in the morning. So I wake up and I make breakfast for my family and then get my daughter up and help her get ready so my wife can get ready for work. And I work from home most of the time, so I have that wiggle room. So I've got a good chunk of free time in the morning, but I've been waking up earlier to try to start my day off better. Then I'll go into my living room. It's still kind of dark, right? I'm sitting down and I'm not really doing the Buddhist monk sort of traditional meditation that you're thinking. I'm not going Om or whatever. I'm just sitting down and closing my eyes, trying to clear my mind, which is really hard, by the way. If anybody ever tries to get into meditation, that shit is really hard to clear your mind, to stop thinking. The reason I bring all this up is because I had something kind of interesting happen that's in the vein of what we talk about. And let me just caveat and say, I don't think that anything supernatural happened, but it did spark my imagination. So I think it was session 3 or 4. And I was sitting there, and the only thing I've been working on is just trying to clear my brain. It's like a constant struggle. And there were some moments where I think that I did empty my mind for 3 to 4 seconds before everything came rushing back. But something crazy happened on one of those during one of those sessions, those little time periods. I had the most vivid vision, picture of something come into my head when I was doing that. And the first time it happened, it freaked me out so much that I snapped back to awareness and had to open my eyes because it came so fast and it was so vivid. I had my eyes closed and I was trying to empty my mind. And then all of a sudden I saw this corner of a white hallway, or maybe it was a closet or something, but it was basically just one of those whitewash walls, kind of like the walls that we have in the homes around here, but it was a little bit more smooth. But those textured walls, it's the quintessential white walls in a home, but they're textured, they're a little bumpy or whatever. So I saw a corner like that, but then in front of that corner was a box. And it was it was taller than it was wide, but it was a pretty big box, maybe 3 feet by 4 feet or something like that, or 3 by 5 feet or something like that. So it is in the corner of this room. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is because it popped into my head out of nowhere. And it was so vivid. I wasn't even thinking about anything. No idea why that happened. So I cleared my mind, right? I'm all right, just threw that out. That's interesting. It's cool. So I closed my eyes and I tried to do it again. The second time I had an image come into my head, it was like HD. It was like watching a TV in my mind's eye, which I don't know. I feel like most people, myself, I've never, when I close my eyes and think of something, it's not HD. So I had this image of a metal sheet. If you ever seen those shacks that have the old corrugated metal roofs or roofs or whatever, it was kind of like that, but it was on its side and there was water hitting it like rain, and the rain was dropping down the side of it. And it was just running down really quickly. So it was it was like watching a live scene of rain hitting an old tin roof that was on the ground on its side. And that lasted 2 or 3 seconds, but it was so vivid. And then this is the silly part. I know, I don't think I was seeing anything remote. I wasn't remote viewing or anything, but it did remind me of the episode that we did with remote viewing. And I imagine if remote viewing was real, it would be
The
like
Mars
that.
one?
Yeah, the Mars one we did.
You sure you weren't on acid?
No, maybe.
Maybe.
Well, I did have my acid coffee that morning, but
That's
what do
pretty
you think about? I mean,
interesting, man.
that's weird, right? Have you ever tried to meditate?
I've meditated before, but not to that extent where I fucking Ace
Saw shit.
Ventura out of my body where he goes to the temple.
Bumblebee tuna.
Bumblebee
Oh
tuna.
man.
No, that's interesting. It sounds like you're pretty hyper focused for that to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
And
very
I
rare
think
for someone to clear their mind because it's very
mhm,
difficult to do.
yeah.
And you were just hyper like focused and cleared and focused on your meditation. So I'm not shocked by that.
Yeah.
I've
I think
heard of that happening to people.
yeah. I think probably what's going on, putting aside the mystical awesomeness that could possibly be happening. I think in reality what's happening is you're kind of, if your brain isn't used to doing that while you're awake, then you might be entering kind of like a dream state for a second. Like you're literally dreaming while you're awake. And I think that's probably what happened. Like for whatever reason, my brain just shot a random simplistic image. But the thing that I want to stress that this one more time is like the rain on the corrugated sheet metal. It was so freaking vivid. It was unreal. Like it was so much more vivid than any dream I've ever had. And I hope that that image stays burned in my head because it was so cool to see like the rain dropping down. It was like watching an HD TV, the rain just dropping down, and then it just as quickly as it came, it was gone. So, but yeah, can you imagine like if you were doing remote viewing, like that Mon and Sub situation we read about, the CIA paper or whatever, like if someone was sitting there and they were actually vividly seeing these images in their head and they were just describing them, and it's basically like a movie playing out. So it's kind of cool to get a taste of what that might be like if it really did happen, if it's a real thing.
Now, to
Come
play
back.
the devil's advocate, you
Yep.
sure you didn't fall asleep?
I think if I did, I probably would have cracked my head on the floor. But I was sitting up straight, so I'm pretty
That's
sure
fair.
I did think about that though. I was like, how many people
Think they
fall asleep
meditate and
during
fall asleep.
meditation? Yeah,
Yeah. Try it again.
I am. I'm
See
gonna
what
keep doing it.
happens. See what
One
happens.
day, like I'm gonna come back one day on a Friday to sit down and record, and I'm just gonna be wearing like I'm gonna shave my head and have like a robe on and be like, I'm sorry, Chris, I cannot do the podcast anymore. I have reached a higher state. And then I bend off screen and I go, you hear me go, I found this powder. It's been opening my mind.
You fucking dumbass. Uh,
That's one of my favorite bits in comedies, by the way, where it's just like, hey, I found this pill outside and I took it, but I don't think anything's been happening. What about you, mystical creature flying above me? Has anything been happening to you? Well, no, Peter. You see, I don't think that pill was anything that you found outside.
so to jump into today's topic of discussion, La Llorona, also known as the Weeping Woman. So, listeners, if you've been with us for a while, you'll recall that in the episodes that begin with the 20s, I think we talked about weeping women around the world, right? We talked about different types. He talked about some stuff from Indonesia. We talked about some stuff from Japan. We talked about the Kuchisakeona, but we briefly mentioned La Llorona. And like I said before, when we started, I did a solo episode on La Llorona. But I'd be curious to get Dean's insight on his perspective on La Llorona. For those of you that are not familiar with La Llorona, she is a legendary figure in Latin American folklore. Her story varies significantly across different regions throughout Central and South America. It also overlaps into the Caribbean. There have been claims of sightings of her in the United States as well. The core of the tale usually revolves around a woman named Maria, who is often described as stunningly beautiful, but she was poor. Because of her beauty, a wealthy man, a nobleman, falls in love with her. So they marry, they have children. But her husband later abandons her either for another woman or because of societal pressures. And in a fit of despair and rage or madness, Maria takes her two young children, walks them over to the river, and then just drowns them, holds them down in the water until they die. After that happens, she is consumed by guilt because she finally realized what she did. She either dies from grief, dies from starvation, or she takes her own life. Again, there's different variations to this story, which we will touch upon. When I heard this story growing up, it was mainly to scare me. My mom would say, La Llorona is going to come get you because you don't want to go to sleep.
Oh my
So
god.
there's that factor
It's
to
like
it.
you didn't brush your teeth, you didn't clean up your room. It's like La Llorona, La Llorona, like all the time, just constantly terrifying you.
Yeah, pretty much. So, what are your thoughts on the overall concept of this story before we go into the regional variations?
I mean, first of all, I think that this is a story that's clearly rooted in a lot of historical narrative and examples because like you said that there's a lot of examples all over the world of such things happening. I mean, not even just like the paranormal part, just the sad, terrible part. Like, man marries woman, they have kids, and then dude gets 7-year itch, gets a little hot footed and start, wandering away from his family's central hub, and the woman kind of turns to despair because she doesn't have anybody else. And I think that's even more emphasized in cultures where like women don't have as much opportunity to go out and have friends or like a different life, like a separate life other than their family. So like if imagine like the man is your whole life and your culture, and then he leaves or abandons you and you have your children, but then your children are like a part of your husband who you now like really deeply resent and or hate. So it's such a dark concept, especially like I hate talking about shit like this with kids that are involved, but it happens and it has to be talked about because it's a real thing. We can't just like whitewash over it. So that's the first thing I think of with La Llorona. The second thing is I don't really know a lot about Latin American or Hispanic culture, but I love it. Like everything about it. There's so much rich history and all that stuff. And so I do know of the story in general. Maybe I do feel like it sucks that your mom or your family used that to get you to terrify you into doing stuff. I'm sure my parents and my family have done the same thing and like monsters are going to come get you or something like that. I don't know if that's like the best way to raise a child, but I guess it is effective in the moment. So that'd be fun to talk about momentarily, like the effects that might have had on you, especially the memories you have of being younger and potentially seeing La Llorona or hearing stories about. Like we've talked to people who have seen her before. So, and then the last thing I'll say is circling back to the different cultures. I think that there are a lot of overlaps that who knows, man? Like if ghosts are real and the spirits like humans that turn into spirits and negative spirits or poltergeists or whatever, like however that falls categorically into the paranormal, then I think that this is probably a story that would increase the odds because it's such a powerful concept, like powerfully negative concept.
Thankfully, I've never seen her. Nobody I know has encountered her. My mom just used it as a scare tactic for us. It's now become a joke. And the reason I say it's become a joke is because we're far removed from the regions in which she operates, right?
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to quickly talk about that you mentioned, and correct me if I got this wrong, but the gist of what you were saying is the potential of people seeing her in different locations based off of the belief. Is that what you were trying to get at?
Yeah. So like the fact that this tragic story repeats across cultures and time periods and stuff like that, like the quintessential woman who is slighted and then she is alone with her kids and she resents her husband and then she goes and kills her kids and then kills herself or dies or whatever. And then her spirit haunts. Oh my God, what's the one? We'll talk about this more in depth later, but when I look up her name, but there's one in Indonesia that is basically a woman who has like a gaping hole in her stomach. When I was traveling to Indonesia, I was actually like that one was the one I was most afraid of seeing, and it would actually be on my mind because she made this weird sound. But we'll talk about that later. Like I'll let you get back
Oh,
into La
oh
Llorona.
yeah, the me, whatever one you talked about.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, that one was. I remember when you first told me that like 12 years
Give me
ago.
chills. Yeah.
Yeah, it gave me chills. It really did. But what I wanted to lean into was that whole concept of not just the different cultural stories that are similar, but the fact that the people that believe in this story and believe in this I don't know what you want to call her, spirit, demonic entity, malevolent force, angry spirit, vengeful spirit, whatever you want to call her, right? Her appearing in different places is based off of the people that believe that she's real. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, almost like they're kind of like bringing her to bear, like actually bringing it out, giving it power, so to speak.
Yeah, right, exactly. Giving it power.
Let's just go to the basics right now. Like, what is La Llorona in terms of like what do people report seeing her as? Like, how does she appear? Where does she appear? Isn't there some kind of like association with water?
The most common place where there are reportings of La Llorona come from Mexico because apparently all of this stuff happened in Mexico. Like I said earlier, she drowns her kids. In some of the stories, she drowns them in a river. So there's always a body of water involved when it comes to her sightings or being, in a close vicinity to a body of water, from my understanding. After she killed her kids, I did say she, roamed around. She might have killed herself. She might have just died from starvation. But the trademark thing you would know that that La Llorona is around is she will walk around wailing "Ay mis hijos." That translates to "Oh my children." What she's doing is she's looking for her children. And essentially the reason she's doing that in some of the legends or stories, because there's just so many variations. It's said that after she killed her kids and she died of starvation, she went to the gates of heaven and they didn't let her in because of what she did. And she is forced to roam the earth forever looking for her children. So she's like this ghost spirit thing forever, doomed to roam around looking for her kids. The way that you would know that she's near is that you would hear the wail, "Ay mis hijos," right? And the code to it is that if she sounds close to you, it means she's far away. But if she sounds like she's far away, it means that she's very close to you. And you need to lock your doors and shut your windows because she's coming for your ass.
When you're talking about that, I think about this occasionally whenever we talk about like stories like this where the ghost is of the person, the spirit is forced to roam the earth or whatever. It's a terrifying story or concept, but the scientific part of me is like, well, what happens in like a million years when the earth is obliterated by the expanding sun? Like, what, I can't not think about like the scientific angle. It's like, okay, so
Sucks to be you.
well, then what happens to you? Like so if your spirit is tied to the earth and you're wandering the earth, what if you got to a point where like either humanity wasn't humanity anymore because it evolved way beyond what humanity used to be? So we're literally now like some other crazy, highly developed category above humans. So there's not even any human emotion anymore. So your spirit's tied to like human emotion and you're exuding all this, but there's no outlet for you. Like if someone saw you, like, or if something that was evolved from humans be like in a million years saw you, they wouldn't even know like what the fuck you like. They would, oh yeah, that's just like, okay, well, I don't know what that is. I'm just going to keep moving on. So you can't even show yourself to anyone anymore. But then let's imagine that everybody leaves the earth and or the earth is like obliterated through some catastrophe. Is your spirit just like floating through space without any ability to move or like, I don't know. Like I just think like, what do you think about that? Like what about the
Yeah, that's a
scientific
good point.
aspect?
And I think from that perspective, maybe it's bound to that location, that
But
physical
like
location
but
until
bound to earth or bound
bound.
to
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
spatial location?
I,
Because there's
I
two
would say
different
bound
things.
to earth. I would say
Okay.
bound to earth. And when earth is
Interesting.
gone, therefore you are let go from your bonds or whatever chains.
Or you know how they say that parts of the moon and Mars that have been brought back have been cursed or they've cursed people? That's a cool concept, right? Like I've heard stories of like people bringing back parts of the moon and then whoever has that moon part, they have terrible things happen to them, like it's almost cursed sort of thing. That'd be crazy. Like if there was like some kind of maybe not the moon because the moon, came from something slamming into the earth and breaking off from the Earth a long time, like way before humans existed. But if you argued that Mars used to harbor life, like that remote viewing thing we did, the episode we did not long ago, where
Right.
there was supposedly a race of aliens that are 1,000,000 years old or whatever, they're long gone. But maybe like if you bring back the moon rock or the Mars rock that has an alien ghost tied to it, then it's going to start fucking with the people who have that in their possession on Earth. That's kind of a weird, interesting concept. Like it's tied to the actual rubble of the planet.
Yeah, true. It'd be interesting. But I think once the planet goes, it would be one of those things. If there is some sort of cosmic tying or different, I don't know how to say it, plane of existence,
Mm-hmm.
they would know, like,
Yeah.
okay, Earth is gone. All right. Okay. You were there for like 3 billion years. We get it. You're all right
Yeah.
now. But to continue on, I've always found it interesting about the different variations. And obviously, La Llorona is based off of some historical fact because when you get into the Spanish conquest of the Aztecs, I mean, a lot of people died. It intertwines with Aztec mythology, the goddess Cihuacatl, that's spelled Cihuacatl, who was said to weep for her children before the Spanish conquest. So there's already mythological tie-ins to this paranormal figure. And specifically in Mexico, you go from the goddess perspective, and then it evolves into the woman betrayed by her lover, which I talked about. And then it morphs into La Llorona being feared as a malevolent spirit who lures children and sometimes men to their watery deaths. And the reason she lures children, which is funny, I scared my friend's kid with this story because he didn't want to go to bed. It was like 3 weeks ago. We went over there on a Friday night and it was like 9 o'clock and he didn't want to go to bed. I was like, and he likes to watch horror things on Netflix. So, quick side story. And I'm going through his Netflix on his tablet, and his mom didn't know he was watching all this horror stuff. So I was like, "You want to hear a real scary story that my mom used to tell me?" And then I told him about La Llorona. And then towards the end of the night, he's like, "Is La Llorona gonna get me?" I'm like, "She only comes if you don't behave and if
the
you don't go to
trauma
bed."
the trauma continues. Way to go, man. You're just taking that ancient trauma, just passing it down to the next person, the next person.
It's the greatest thing ever.
Oh yeah. That's I'm sure. Just ruining a child is the greatest thing in the world, isn't it? By the
Dude,
way,
if he's watching
it's counterproductive.
if he's
Yeah.
watching it and Pennywise,
Yeah.
asking me about Pennywise.
I know. I watched the original It too when I was a kid, and let's face it, like there's a lot of shit that screwed us up as kids because parents
Oh
weren't paying
yeah.
close enough attention. Like just look at Ren and Stimpy. I watched Ren and Stimpy for months before like my parents caught on to the insanity of that. It's
Oh,
even worse
geez.
today with like YouTube and like multiple streams of media. Like you can't possibly. I mean, I'm sure there are ways to stay on top of it, but it's way
Oh,
harder
yeah.
than it was back in the day.
Oh, definitely. But yeah, so long story short, I scared him with the story and he went to bed. So it worked. I haven't heard about it since. I haven't
So
heard about it
counterintuitive
since.
to me that it doesn't make sense to me. It's like, here, you got to go to sleep. Let me just fill your little brain with this terrible, horrifying story about someone's going to come get you. You're alone in your room, expect them to fall asleep. Like that just doesn't. But I guess
It's funny. He likes
maybe it'll
horror
work.
stuff anyway. So
Okay, how old is he?
he's 8.
Ish.
He's gonna be 9.
8. Okay, that's
Yeah.
pretty. That's able to understand a good amount of stuff, I guess.
Yeah, like if you're watching Pennywise and these Stephen King movies and all these horror movies, yeah, you'll be all right. The dude watched The Freaking Nun, so I'm like, okay, like that's gotta scare you.
That's so wrong, man.
I
That's
know.
I mean, that's worse too because when we were kids and we were watching horror movies, they were scary, but they were like campy and cheesy with the effects usually. But nowadays it's like high definition, black and white nun face like coming out of the wall, like it looks like it's coming out of the TV at you, and Like I
Yeah.
just feel like the visuals are way more potent nowadays.
Oh
And
yeah, they definitely stick in your mind's eye for a very long time. But I want to move on to the Guatemalan version of it. And
Mhm.
they call her La Ciguanaba, who was originally a beautiful woman who deceived her husband, leading to her curse. In this version, she targets unfaithful men. She appears as a beautiful woman who transforms into a monstrous figure when approached and kills them. That's interesting.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of the slit mouth thing with like what like she just she shows up, she targets you. This is actually big in Southeast Asian culture as well. Like this concept that the evil entity will call the men or like lure them in and then kill them, consume them or whatever they need to, why they need to kill them, how whatever reason.
Yeah, the Kuchisake Onna, she's like, "Do you think I'm pretty?" And it's like, "Do you think you're pretty?" Yeah,
Yeah,
you
how did
do
we
a
figure
mind fuck.
we figured out how to get out of that? Go okay, if you need to know how to get out of that situation, go listen to that episode. What was it again? It was you hold up a mirror and then you like grill her about it, and it's like,
Yeah, it's
well, if
like
you say
she
something
asked, "Do
about
you think
yourself,
I'm pretty?" Yeah, like,
yeah,
well,
like
do you think you're pretty? And then you
yeah,
just
just you got to throw it back at her and bounce it off like a mirror, and then she has to think about killing herself. Like that's how you just destroy her. You
yeah,
ask her the same question, and she has to kill herself when she answers the way that she wants you to answer.
yeah.
That's called deflection, by the way. If you ever watch politicians already, like just look up deflection. That's the answer to all of life's problems when it comes down to like dealing
Deflect,
with
deflect,
people.
deflect.
Deflect everything back onto them, and that's all you got to do. That's like
That's called
it's
gaslighting.
so yeah. That's the social or the relationship level of deflecting.
Right. So, moving from Guatemala to El Salvador. So this one I find funny. La Llorona is blended with the local legend of La Sucia. This is
Dr. Susie?
basically no, it basically means dirty. A ghostly woman cursed to wander for eternity due to immoral behavior. The legend serves as a cautionary tale for men to avoid infidelity and excessive drinking. So, ladies, if you're not a Spanish speaker and someone ever calls you a sucia, yeah, they're insulting you. Don't let people call you a sucia.
I just hear when I hear that I just think of Dr. Seuss and it just sounds whimsical to me.
Dean, are you a sucia?
The frump on the flump on the back of my hump.
Okay, in Colombia, it's this one's interesting. So similar to the Mexican story, she drowns her children out of vengeance against a cheating husband. With this one, she's set to haunt the Andes, particularly at night, and they could hear her echoes wailing through the mountains. Some versions describe her as protecting certain regions, rivers, and lakes, and punishing those who pollute them. So this one is a little different from the others. The other regions that we've covered so far have basically been targeting like children, targeting men that drink excessively, men that practice infidelity. This one seems to be more of, I don't know, a hippie protecting the
Oh,
environment,
interesting.
man.
Yeah, so if you start messing with the environment, see that one makes more sense to me than like this, like the going after infidelity and excessive drinking and all that stuff. Like hedonism is like it's hedonism in human culture. Like that doesn't make sense why spirits would bother with that. Because really, like I mean, okay, let's be honest. What's really
I mean, like
happening
if she
here?
was wronged by someone because of hedonism, I could see why.
It seems like the cultural aspect that we've already talked about is people trying to get other people, like creating stories to get other people to do things. And this is totally a perfect tie back to the child example. You're telling stories to someone that you want to elicit change to, like physical, emotional change from. Like, don't do this, don't do that, or someone's going to come get you. But if you're talking about the actual ghost, I don't think the ghost would give two shits. I mean, unless it really is like, if they hate that so much, then they just have to attack it. But it always seems like there's some kind of underlying like lesson. Like, so maybe there's a good aspect to it. Like, Like just like we talked about with Krampus and Christmas and Santa, like Krampus is supposed to be he's supposed to be working in tandem with Santa. Like
Right.
he's not the antithesis to like kill Santa. He's like he works with Santa to make bad children listen better. And maybe it's the same way with this. If these spirits are real, like hopefully they're just trying to like scare the shit out of people to get them to do good. But then maybe that's their way of trying to earn, their wings, so to speak, or like to fix their situation. But going back to the hippie one, that makes more sense to me, that a spirit that's tied to the earth would want to protect the natural earth, that it would want to scare people into making sure that they don't pollute or do terrible things to nature, which like, look how great that's working in South America and the Amazon. I don't think that's
She's
not
slacking
working very
off.
well. Slacking, man. Yeah. I mean,
Right.
look at all the infidelity and shit everywhere. Like all the what's that one
What?
online shit? What's it called? Where people like post their feet and like pictures. Oh,
Feet
OnlyFans.
pictures.
Look at OnlyFans. OnlyFans is a perfect example of like we are maximizing the amount of like perverseness and stuff that permeates through society. And I feel like at that point, like a La Llorona ghost or whoever or whatever is just gonna like take a breather. It's like,
It's like,
okay,
I
this is
quit.
getting a little ridiculous. This
I can't
is
do
getting
this
ridiculous.
anymore.
This is ridiculous.
There's like more than one of them. They all get back to their ghostly headquarters. How many did you get today? 6,000. Same here.
How
This
many
is
are left?
exhausting.
8 billion.
Million.
All of them. We're all secretly doing no things behind closed doors.
But continuing with that theme of not appearing as a vengeful type of spirit in Venezuela, some Venezuelan versions portray La Llorona as a warning against harming children. In Venezuela, she appears more as a tragic figure as opposed to being vengeful, like the other versions we've talked about, with an emphasis on her guilt and her eternal mourning for losing her children. So this one is more so like, I guess would say a trap spirit. The lesson here is don't harm children because you will end up as X.
What
Well, you
does
shouldn't
that
harm
include?
children anyway, but
Does that include telling children terrible ghost stories and it's just a vicious cycle? Like, oh, you tell the child the terrible ghost story, scares the shit out of and damages them, and then the ghost comes and haunts you, and then you go back and tell the child about how the ghost is haunted. It's like vicious. It's just a continuous cycle.
you know what's funny? He was like, "Is she gonna come for you too?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not a kid."
You're a child at heart.
At heart. Argentina, La Llorona takes a different type of lesson, I would say.
Yeah.
Like her story is a little different. So they in some areas they call her La Mujer del Blanco, so the woman in white, and her tale incorporates elements of social class conflict because in this story, she is abandoned by a rich lover. She does kill her kids. In this tale, she doesn't kill her kids because she's angry at the husband for leaving her. She kills her kids to prevent them from suffering from poverty. She's like, I'd rather have you guys die than to suffer in poverty.
That's an interesting angle. I wasn't expecting that. That's like a social conundrum. I mean, like, of course, you don't want to kill any kid for any reason. I mean, kids are literally like balls of hope. Like if you have a kid and they're healthy, like it doesn't matter if they're rich or poor, like there's so much opportunity and hope, but maybe only in like Western cultures where there's some air of like market capitalism or something like freedom. I mean, I guess if you live in a country where you don't really have a lot of prospects, like you can't just go start a YouTube channel with your kid and like try to make them like make money from it. Like that, those avenues don't work. It's probably like in the same vein as like back in the day in like just take America for example during what the Dust Bowl or like the Great Depression or whatever. Like I think there were even stories of like parents who were selling their kids. And I guess the argument is like, well, I mean, you look at it from the outside at a simplistic level, and it's like, oh, that's terrible, like they're just selling their kids so they could survive. But really the story is they're selling their kids to a home where the kids have a better prospect of having something good in their life happen, and then the parent gets some money to survive to maybe reunite with their child later. I don't know, such a dark story, but that is an interesting twist that she ends up killing her kids to protect them from suffering. I mean, obviously I don't agree with that, but again,
Right.
it all ties back into like the social situation or the society that she occupies. But so what happens? Okay, so she kills her kids. She doesn't die from grief, it sounds like. It
No,
sounds
this
like
is more
she's
so
angry.
like she's angry, and this is
Yeah.
more so kind of like a lesson
Mhm.
in the difference of social classes.
Yeah.
So this one
Yeah.
wasn't like, about vengeful spirits or anything like that. It's kind of like it's more so this is the consequence of, I guess, dropping from the extreme top all the way to the bottom because you don't know how to cope with it. These kids won't know how to cope with it. So they're better off dead
Yeah.
as opposed to living a life of suffering.
See, I
And
don't think this story is like this one doesn't seem like a lesson because if it's a lesson, who are you targeting? Are you targeting the ultra rich who probably don't give two shits about you for the most part anyway? And it's like if you're trying to tell this story to a rich person, it's like, oh, don't cheat on your wife if you're really rich because you are going to inadvertently
I wouldn't say,
have
okay,
your
let me
children
rephrase
die.
that. I wouldn't say
Yeah,
lesson, but more so to bring awareness
yeah.
of how drastically different it is for different people within the
I see, I
society.
see, I see. Yeah, like the gravity of killing children because you don't want them to be poor. Um, then if they're already poor kids, you can understand like how bad it would be. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I could see that coming about organically from a society. But then what's the actual presenting of this spirit? Like if this is a real spirit and she shows up, does she haunt rich people? Does she go after like people who are she obviously doesn't go after people who are poor because that's they're she's trying to help or the story's trying to help those people not be as poor in society, so maybe she's like haunting people who are misers, kind of like Scrooges, so to speak.
Yeah, I could see that being the
Yeah.
case. Yeah, unfortunately, I couldn't find as much detail on that specifically because when you look up La Llorona, it's more so your traditional vengeful spirit
Yeah.
type of stuff. You know what I found funny? Um, about people using her story. Her story is used to reinforce familial and cultural values. So I was just trying
Hmm.
to instill some cultural value into the kid.
Nice save. Oh man.
So yeah, dude, those are the different variations of the story when it comes to La Llorona. And obviously it has a very strong cultural significance. One, it's used as a cautionary tale as across all of the versions of La Llorona. There is a moral lesson, warning people against betrayal, infidelity, neglecting your family. The modern interpretations view La Llorona as a symbol of oppressed women, particularly those marginalized by societal expectations or abusive relationships. So that's how La Llorona has kind of morphed in our modern times on how her story is viewed, which I could completely see that. And also, we had the aspect of the supernatural guardian in some regions in which he protects, waterways and punishing those that want to bring harm to the environment. I did want to segue into sightings that people have encountered. Well, I don't want to say encountered, sightings that people have had of La Llorona. And I'll start off by saying, as you know, I'm on TikTok. I like to scroll through TikTok. I like to doom scroll on the paranormal side. And you come across videos of people claiming they hear La Llorona or they caught her on video. And there have been some really creepy ones that I've seen. There was one, and the guy was in Mexico. I believe it was in the countryside. I forget what particular part, but he says in Spanish that it's La Llorona. Like he can hear La Llorona, and he opens up the door to his balcony and he's standing out there and he's recording video and you hear in the distance somebody wailing, saying the traditional "Ay mis hijos," and it's really creepy and really bone chilling. And another one that I saw was this guy. It was late in the night, and he was like on a motorcycle going down this like old dirt path, and you can hear a woman screaming and wailing behind him, saying the "I mis hijos" and stuff. Really fucking creepy. But you did come across an article, which we will link in the description, about La Llorona sightings.
This one is older. Well, not too old, I guess, but it's the first thing that popped
2021.
up. Yeah, 2021 July. I mean, you could see that this story bounced around. So, people picked up different venues or mediums picked up on this and reported on it. But so I guess this took place in a specific area in Laredo, Texas. And according to the article, it was somewhere between Mines Road, Father Charles M. McNoby Park. It's very interesting because it's a simplistic story, and I guess it's the quintessential, like that's basically what you described. Like someone was driving through at 2 a.m, and they had their windows down and they were recording, or they heard this sound in the distance, and then they started recording, and then they supposedly captured a woman in a long flowing dress, dark hair. She was quietly walking. So this guy who took this video, he said that the video itself, like, it was very strange, and the images that he pulled from it, they didn't seem normal. Like, there was a lot of light and certain angles that had kind of choppiness to them that didn't seem like it would come about naturally when taking a regular video or taking stills or whatever. And I guess he reported this thing repeating in and around the area for months after that. But basically, it's just, this guy who had this supposed encounter. And if you Google recent sightings of La Llorona, there's a super creepy image of a blurry still. It's basically a woman in the distance, and she looks like she's standing in a field, but it's very grainy. Whatever this is wearing like a long flowing gown or something. There's a little bit of light see through. And that's kind of a haunting image. Here's my problem with these stories and the images. There's nothing really paranormal about the actual story or sighting itself. Like, you see a woman wearing a dress, and her face is obfuscated. Like, it's not like they're capturing this thing flying or even like turning into something. Like, it's not like a cryptid where, oh, you took a video of Bigfoot. It's like, this is a spirit that supposedly has all the likeness of a human being, like a regular human woman. And so, like, I could see where a lot of misreporting would come about from such a thing. But the thing that gets me about this story, this sighting in 2021, is the imagery that goes along with it. The images do seem strange. I'm not saying this dude didn't pull one over on other people, but if there was a story that was like this, at least it comes with images that are creepy. Do you have any take on this at all?
I think you make some good points. I like La Llorona's story. I want to say that these sightings are real. It's hard to say because the picture is like really blurry, right? it could have
Mm.
it could have been
Always
doctored.
blurry.
It could have been somebody, dressed like that, doing that for fun, which is always in the realm of possibility. It's really hard to tell. But the fact that so many people have seen her, and this has been a story for centuries, and people have had encounters for centuries. I'd like to think there might be some truth to this article.
Okay, here's something cool. I'm going to share one more story that I came across that is attached to an article, came out in January 2020. It's also not very old, but this is a sighting of La Llorona in Colombia. And this one comes with a video. And we'll throw it into the podcast recording, but if you want to go check it out, or you can just search it yourself. It's from a website called Infinity Explorers, and the title is "A Chilling Video Shows La Llorona in a Town in Colombia." And it is pretty creepy. It looks like this woman or this figure is dancing on the top of a tree. I think there's some doctoring going on because there's some like miscoloration or discolorations around the entity as it's dancing. So it looks like it was kind of like superimposed, but I also don't know a lot about video scrutiny. So at the very least, it's interesting and it looks creepy as fuck. Go check that out. And before we sign off today, I have to bring this up. I have to bring this story up because it's one of my favorite from Southeast Asia, and it's right in line with the Wailing Woman. So the name of the spirit is the Kuntilanak. I think I said that correctly. Kuntilanak. The Malay name for this entity is the Pontianak. The story was told to me when I was in Indonesia. It's basically this woman, looks like a woman who is in a long flowing white gown, That's nothing new. Her hair is draped over her face and it's wet. It looks like, kind of like the Ring or whatever, like that the creature that comes out of the TV, like the hair is over her face, so her face is not seen. But it's long flowing black hair, white flowing gown. But the difference is in her stomach area where she would normally carry a child, it's an empty void, just a black empty void where she used to carry her child. And the story goes that the spirit lost the child in birth. I think the child was like stillborn or something like that. And she was so bereft with grief that she just wanders around wailing and crying. But she also, I think she consumes men in her grief and frustration. It's like, she's turned into a negative spirit and she has to like consume and whatever, like destroy. So this story was told to me, like, if you're a handsome guy and you hear the sound that she makes, it's like, if you hear that sound behind you, the Kuntilanak is standing behind you. And if you turn around and face her and you give her attention, she will kill you. She will consume you, eat you, or whatever, like kill you and just slaughter you. But if you ignore it and you go about your business like you're not hearing it, then she'll leave you alone eventually. And I remember standing in my friend's shower, like taking a shower by myself in Indonesia, and thinking about the image of the spirit, like in the white gown, wet, sopping hair over her face. And I just like couldn't stop thinking about it. And I was just like, I was waiting to hear it. I was waiting to hear the sound. It felt like it was in the room with me because I psyched myself out. I think to this day, that is one of my all-time favorite ghost stories that are tied to like an area or a culture. The Kuntilanak in Indonesia.
Listeners, if you hear that sound, do not turn around. And if you hear in Spanish, "Ay mis hijos," lock your doors and shut your windows. La Llorona is going to get your ass. We will put the links in the episode description for the articles that we referenced in today's show. If you enjoyed today's show, give us a like, share the show, because that helps it grow massively. And let us know what you think about La Llorona. Do you think her sightings are fake? Do you know anyone that's had sightings of La Llorona? Go ahead and let us know. Thanks for listening. Merry Christmas.
Merry
Happy
Christmas.
holidays.
Happy holidays. Woo!
Thanks for tuning into today's episode of The Wandering Road. You can find us on Apple, Google, Spotify, and most podcast platforms. Be sure to subscribe and share. Also, don't forget to give a follow on Instagram at TW Road Podcast and follow my TikTok at TWR Podcast. Take care, and I'll catch you on the next one.